Welcome to today's Explainer. So, let's jump right in. Have you ever found yourself totally backed into a corner in a debate, missing that one specific fact you need, so you just kind of invent something that sounds logically flawless? Yeah, we've all been there. Today we're diving into the incredibly ancient, highly sophisticated art of the intellectual bluff. As you'll see, we're tracing a very human instinct back through centuries of history.
Really think about it for a second. Have you ever made up a fact purely because it just sounded right? Maybe you threw out a totally fake yet super believable statistic in a meeting, or you confidently cited a non-existent study just to win an argument with a friend. Look, don't worry, you are definitely not alone here. What's truly fascinating is that some of the greatest ancient scholars shared this exact same instinct. They just pulled it off with a whole lot more style than we do today.
Section 1. What is xiangdong the anatomy of a perfect bluff?
This classic Chinese idiom perfectly captures the whole concept. It essentially translates to deducing that something absolutely must be true, or that it naturally should be a certain way, even if it didn't actually happen in reality. It's literally the ultimate intellectual defense for a highly educated guess. You aren't technically lying, you're just confidently asserting that the universe's logic dictates it absolutely must have happened this way.
But the absolute best part is right at the very end of the phrase. That last character, well, our dictionary source specifically notes that this is just a grammatical particle at the end of a sentence that has absolutely zero meaning. It literally translates to no meaning. It's really just this resonant, confident sound you use to cap off a bold claim. It's like saying, obviously the historical event happened exactly like this. Boom. That little verbal exclamation mark is the energy of It just makes whoever is speaking sound absolutely unshakably certain.
Section 2. Kong Rong and Cao Cao, the original historical bluff. So, according to historical records from the Han Dynasty, the scholar Kong Rong wrote a letter to Cao Cao. Now, Cao Cao was essentially the most powerful, intimidating warlord of the entire era. And in this letter, Kong Rong boldly throws out a historical fact as a precedent, stating, when King Wu punished Zhao, he gave Daji to the Duke of Zhao. He wrote this with absolute theatrical confidence, just casually dropping a massive piece of ancient royal gossip right into official correspondence with a warlord.
Now, put yourself in Cao Cao's shoes for a second. You're a highly educated leader, you know your history inside and out. But you read this letter and you just freeze. Cao Cao was completely baffled. He didn't recognize this historical reference at all. He actually had to pause his day and ask Kong Rong, what classic text is this from? He's desperately trying to figure out where on earth Kong Rong read this wild claim about King Wu and Daji.
And this is where Kong Rong delivers the ultimate cheeky punchline. He replies to literally the most dangerous warlord in China by saying, measuring it by today, I just assumed it must be so. He basically admitted right there that he completely made it up. He just looked at how things were operating in their current political climate and deduced that logically, historically, the exact same thing must have happened back then. It's an astoundingly bold intellectual move to pull on a guy who could have you executed.
Section 3. Sushi's exam trick. Bluffing on the ultimate test.
Fast forward a bit to the Song Dynasty. The famous scholar Su Shi was taking the imperial examination. Specifically, a really crucial paper on loyalty and punishment. And he wrote this brilliantly balanced philosophical argument. On one hand, he wrote that the ancient justice minister Gao Yao said, kill them 3 times. On the other, he countered that the sage emperor Yao said, forgive them 3 times. Notice how perfectly symmetrical and historically weighty that sounds, right? It reads exactly like some profound piece of ancient wisdom.
Well, the chief examiner grading this test was Mei Shengyu, who was a highly respected scholar himself. He reads Sushi's exam, and he is just blown away by this incredibly deep historical reference. He wants to know all about this profound debate between Yao and Gao Yao, so he actually tracks Sushi down and asks the dreaded question, what book did this come from? Mei Shengyu desperately wanted to look up the original citation, because, well, he'd never read it in any of the classics before.
And how does the great Sushi respond to the guy who is literally grading his exam? Completely deadpan. He looks right back at him and says, I just assumed it must be so. He totally fabricated the quote just to make a logical point on a massive, career-defining exam, and he used the exact same concept as Kong Rong to cover it up. He was basically saying, look, knowing the character of these legendary figures, it's totally logical they would have had that exact conversation. Therefore, I just assumed it into existence. Absolutely brilliant.
Section 4. Summary and reflections. The legacy of the intellectual bluff.
Okay, let's summarize the key takeaways from this historical tactic. First, it means deducing that something absolutely must be true based purely on logic. Second, it is decidedly not based on actual, verified historical events. Third, as we saw with both Kong Rong and Su Shi, it was used as a genius tool to confidently bluff incredibly powerful people. We're talking warlords and top-tier examiners. And fourth, it famously ends with that meaningless but highly confident sound, to really sell the whole premise. This idiom perfectly describes that universal human instinct to confidently state unverified deductions as absolute fact, just as long as our internal logic holds up.
Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. The next time you're backed into a corner in a debate, or maybe you just can't quite remember that specific statistic in a meeting, are you going to use this ancient defense? Will you confidently channel Kong Rong and Su Shi, make a brilliant logical leap, and cap it all off with an unshakable, "I just assumed it must be so"? Look, it's definitely risky, but history shows us that if you do it with enough style, it just might work. Keep questioning those highly confident facts, and thanks for exploring this with me.